It's instantly recognizable, and yet it doesn't sound like anything else.
Arguably one of the most popular guitar riffs ever. Drop a comment if it was one of the first ones you ever learned. It certainly was for me. So simple, but yet so effective. But a few years ago now, I saw a video of Deep Purple and Ritchie Blackmore, obviously the riff's creator, talking about that song and that riff. And there's an interesting detail about that riff that I feel a lot of guitar players, myself included, might have missed. And even John Lord went as far as to say this.
The way Richie plays the riff is not the way that 2 generations of kids have played it in the guitar shop, and driven people mad.
Which actually hints that the vast majority of guitar players probably play Smoke on the Water wrong. But how is that possible when the riff is so simple? A riff made entirely of just 4 notes / chords, how can we possibly be playing that wrong? Well, as I said, there are a few details that a lot of guitar players might have missed. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, there's a few different things that I want to mention in this video. The first one, a lot of people might already know, so I'm going to get this one out of the way first, but the main part is coming a little bit later. So if you already know this first bit, stick around for the bit afterwards, but we're going to get theoretical for a second. Because in another interview with Ritchie Blackmore where he's talking about this riff, this is what he said about it.
A lot of people play it this way. Which is not correct. It's played in fourths, rigid fourths, which is going back to the medieval times. That's how they played a lot of shorn parts, was parallel fourths. So now you have...
A lot of people watching this are already probably aware of that. The riff is played in fourths, not fifths. But what does that actually mean? So let's actually break down a little bit of theory about Smoke on the Water. The song is in the key of G minor. And it's the G natural minor scale, which gives us all of the notes used in all of the melodies, the riffs, everything. So the riff is actually just a root note, a minor third, and a fourth. So the root, the third, and the fourth note of the natural minor scale. On the second repeat though, he adds a note which is the flat fifth, which is technically a note not in the key of G minor, a borrowed note, also known as the blues note. And he actually plays a root, minor third, this flat fifth, and then the fourth. So those notes would be G, B flat, C, G, B flat, C sharp, C. And then we do the first one again, G, B flat, C, back to B flat, and then end on the root. And if we play that, it kind of sounds like it, but it's just missing something. And this is what a lot of guitar players then do, is that they just simply turn that riff into power chords, which might sound something like this. Sounds better, but this is what Ritchie Blackmore was saying, is that while it sounds right, isn't necessarily the way that he plays it. Because if you know anything about power chords are also called 5 chords, which mean they are a root, and they play the 5th note in the scale. So this G power chord, for example, is a G note, and the 5th note in the G minor scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is a D. So a G note and a D note make our power chord. So you would say that these notes are fifths. And it's the same on the next power chord as well, which is a B flat in this case, but if I play the B flat scale, I'm still playing a root and a 5th. Same on the C. So no matter where you're playing a power chord, you're always playing 5 chords, 5th chords, which do sound good, admittedly. But as Richie said, that's not how he plays it. And he actually took inspiration from a lot of classical music, as he said, and didn't play it in fifths, he played it in fourths. What does that mean? So the way that Richie plays it, instead of playing this first power chord, he actually plays his G chord like this, where he's playing the 5th fret on the A string and the D string. And instead of having this shape, he's playing 2 notes on the same fret. And this is what he's referring to in terms of fourths. So if I go up through the G minor scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm actually starting, my lower note is the 5th note of the scale, which Which is interesting because that's not the root. Normally when you're playing a riff, the root note is the lower one, but in this case the root note is actually on the D string, this G note here. So I've actually got a D on the 5th fret of the A string and a G on the 5th fret of the D string. But if you think about what I've just said, this chord here and this chord here, they contain the same notes. This power chord here is a root and a 5th, and technically this one is a root and a 5th, just inverted. So why is this a 5th and why is this a 4th? And that's just because of how these notes actually sit on top of each other. So from this D note here, if I continue up the G minor scale, including this note, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. So this G note here is 4 notes above that D note, and they're stacked on top of each other like that. So that's why it's 4ths, not 5ths, because this D note here is 5 notes above this G note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hence the power chord, but it's 4 notes above this D note, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's usually the case wherever you see 2 notes stacked on top of each other. They are a 4th apart, which basically means they're 4 notes within a scale apart from each other. And that's how he plays the entire riff. Instead of playing this, he plays it like this, which straight away does have a different tone, as you can hear. Verses. So that's the theory out of the way, and obviously talking about the more common way that people play that riff wrong coming from Ritchie Blackmore himself. But it's the next detail I think a lot of us might have missed, so let's listen to Richie talk about the riff and then go back to that thing that John Lord said also.
It's actually picked the 2 notes. A lot of guitarists play it as, but it's actually, it's more that kind of thing. I don't think it would have had the same effect had it been played. It needed that big sound.
So if you caught that, one of the main differences between the way that Richie played it and the way that a lot of other guitar players play it is simply don't use a pick. Which does have a different sound to the pick. And you can even see the clip of Richie playing it live. Again, he didn't use a pick, he was using his fingers to play the riff. So maybe that's what John Lord was referring to. He wasn't talking about what people play it, he was talking about how people play it, whether they use a pick or not. Interestingly as well, Ritchie Blackmore then left Deep Purple, and obviously Deep Purple continued for a very long time with a guitar player called Steve Morse. And I even found this video of Steve Morse talking about how to play Smoke on the Water.
Check out the right hand. Here's the first way. And here's using 2 fingers at the exact same time to grab the strings and lift up. But by using the fingers of your right hand, grabbing the strings, pulling up slightly, you get extra harmonics, and both the strings sound at exactly the same time. Whereas when you strum, there's that momentary difference of time. So to me, it gets a little heavier, a little bit more impact by grabbing the strings and pulling them. And of course playing it as 4ths instead of the full octave in 5th. The full octave in 5th, like this, and the 4th.
Pretty interesting. So Steve also talks about playing the riff with the fingers and talking about how it has a different dynamic and a different tone and everything like that. But one thing that he says, which is pretty interesting, is that if you play with a pick, when you strike the strings, there's always going to be this split-second delay between your first note and your second, because you can't hit them both at the same time. Even though it's very, very quick, you're always going to be hitting this first string before the second string. Whereas if you use your fingers and you play them both at exactly the same time, they're going to obviously play at the same time and going to feel a little bit more in sync. We are talking microseconds, but it does make all the difference. But interestingly enough, this is slightly different from a recent video I made talking about Angus Young and how he plays Thunderstruck, whether he uses a pick and does picking or whether it's all hammer-ons and pull-offs. Something that people are still debating in the comments of that video, even though I provided a lot of proof with live footage of Angus Young playing it. Every single time he's using a pick, he's picking it. He doesn't play it with hammer-ons and pull-offs anyway. With Ritchie Blackmore and Smoke on the Water, however, even though he talked about playing it with his fingers, and even though Steve Morse talks about playing with his fingers, Ritchie Blackmore, if you actually look at live clips of him playing it, he does it both ways. You can find examples of him playing with his fingers, and you can also find examples of him playing with a pick. But one of the really interesting things I noticed is that if Richie plays it with a pick, sometimes he doesn't down pick it, which you might expect. He actually up picks it. Which might be, if you remember earlier, I said that those fourth chords are actually still a root and a fifth, just inverted. So technically they're a fifth and an octave of the root. So because they're inverted, if Richie plays it with a pick, he might still want to start by hitting the root note first, which wouldn't be the low one, it would be the octave, which would be above the fifth. So that's why if I play this chord downwards with a pick, I'm actually starting by hitting the fifth first, not the root note. Whereas if you play upwards, you are hitting the root note first, and then the fifth is secondary. Same on all the chords. So there you go. As I said, arguably rock and roll's most famous guitar riff. A guitar riff that's so simple you might have thought there is no possible way you could play it wrong. Actually turns out there are multiple layers to that riff, multiple ways of looking at it, thinking about it, and actually playing it. But what I will say, similar to the AC/DC Thunderstruck riff, whether it's picked or hammer-ons and pull-offs, play it however you want. The same goes for this riff too. Play it however you want. If you play it in power chords and fifths, fine. If you play it in fourths, fine. If you use a pick, fine. It doesn't matter. Ritchie himself plays it in many different ways. However, the purpose of this video is to just bring these other things to light so that the next time you play Smoke on the Water, you might just think twice about how you play it and try it in some of these other styles and see how you like the sound of it. Anyway guys, what do you think? How do you play rock and roll's most famous guitar riff, Smoke on the Water? Let me know in the comments. And after watching this video, are you going to try it in some of the other ways too? Hope you enjoyed the video guys. If you did, don't forget to leave it a like. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do. I make lots of guitar and music related content, and hopefully I will see you next time.